Okay, so I'm here to talk about my book, Rome's Audacious Claim. I'll back that up so you can see the whole thing. Um, I don't know that it's the greatest title or the greatest cover, but that's the best I could come up with the help of friends and the writers groups that I've been part of. But the book is excellent. The book covers the rise of papal primacy. How did the Church of Rome become the Roman Catholic Church? And how did even how did Rome even come to have a bishop? When did they first have a bishop instead of a group of elders, as is described in the New Testament? And then once they had a bishop, how did that bishop come to have authority over other churches? And how did he come to claim he had authority over all churches? And how did churches respond when those claims were made? So there's some specific claims that arose real early. So for whatever reason, the Pope in Rome, the Bishop of Rome, around in the 190s, tried to excommunicate the church in Ephesus, which I don't know if you realize how far it is from Rome to Ephesus, which is in Turkey, but it's a long ways. It's hundreds and hundreds of miles, maybe 1,000, certainly over 500. And he's trying to excommunicate this church over the date on which they celebrated Passover, which you may not even know that the early churches all celebrated Passover. We call it Easter now, but they called it Passover. And in Ephesus and the surrounding churches, they celebrated Passover on the day that the Jews did. So whatever day of the week it fell on, the Jewish date, Nisan the 14th, that was the day that Ephesus and the churches in that area, which we now call Asia Minor, it was just called Asia then, they call it Asia Minor now, those churches would celebrate the Passover, probably not like the Jews. Almost certainly they celebrated it with communion. But, the 1 Corinthians 5 says Christ, our Passover, was sacrificed for it, and the churches celebrated Passover every year. Now, all the other churches in the Roman Empire, they celebrated Passover on the Sunday after the Jews' date. So the church in Ephesus maybe was celebrating it on a Thursday, depending on which year it was. But every year, the rest of the churches would then celebrate on the following Sunday. And churches used to fast right before Easter, right before Passover, in order to give honor to Jesus' death on the cross. So some of them would fast 2 days because, Friday and Saturday, the days that he was, down in the Hades. And others would fast for a week leading up to it. And so Victor was not approving of what they did. He tried to, I better not get so down in the details because I've already used up 3 minutes. So let me go quicker through. So I cover that. I cover Stephen's, Pope Stephen. He probably could have been called a pope at that time. In the 250s, when he tried to excommunicate quite a large number of churches over the rebaptism of heretics. So in the 250s, the church in Rome was split. It had two bishops. The churches of the empire went, no, this bishop is legitimate, but the other bishop did not resign or anything. He just established his own church that actually lasted a couple of centuries, really kind of merged back together with the Catholic churches in the 4th century. But he said, Stephen, the Bishop of Rome, that had been split by this guy, Novatian, said, yeah, Novatians people, they can baptize and we'll consider their baptism legitimate. And a lot of churches are like, you're out of your mind. These people split the church. We're not accepting their baptism. And Stephen tried to excommunicate them. So how did that get resolved? A lot of bishops wrote letters to him and said, what do you think you're doing? This is a bad idea. And then it got resolved because the Roman Empire martyred him. He was the 4th Roman bishop to be martyred in the 250s, and Rome was actually an excellent, great church in the 250s. Usually they were beneficial to everybody else, but I guess Victor and Stephen kind of lost their minds. And I address all that and the responses and the references to the responses that came back, and where you can read about how the churches responded to those two claims. And then on my way through, basically I go through the early church fathers step by step, looking for all their references to Rome. I address those. I answer Roman Catholic claims along the way. And I mean, the Roman Catholic apologists like Jimmy Akin and Scott Hahn, they just massacre the early church fathers. A lot of them haven't read the early church fathers. Instead, let me see if I have this book just readily available. There's a book, I think the guy's last name is Jurgens, and it's called Fathers of the Catholic Church or something like that. And they get most of their quotes from this book that is just a huge amount of quotes in it. So they don't know the context. They're just kind of going through it on their own. So a friend of mine is commenting about Peter being the rock in Matthew 16, and I go into that quite fully. I actually talk about that all the time. Jesus is obviously the foundation, and we're spiritual rocks. So if Peter is a rock, even if he's the very first rock and gets rewards for that, there's nothing heretical or terrible about that. You'll find that the early Christians go on to say that we all become rocks when we confess Jesus as Christ and Son of God. There's so much to learn from this history. So I'm telling you a bit of it here. I really don't want to get past 10 minutes. I take it all the way up to the 4th and 5th centuries, where Rome really starts making that claim. And then from there, I do a much more general history. So I give some quotes from Orthodox believers from the 6th and 7th century and such on how they reacted to Rome's claims. Actually not from 6th and 7th century Orthodox people, but from Orthodox writings that talk about so the Orthodox are kind of the Eastern Catholics. So everybody basically east of Greece was the Orthodox. They called themselves Catholics too. Rome got, it's really kind of funny that, or at least I find it ironic, Rome was sacked in the 400s. And basically the Roman Empire was no longer the Roman Empire in Europe. It was only the Roman Empire in Greece and further east. And so Rome, the city of Rome, wasn't actually in the Roman Empire. And so anyway, that has a lot to do with how the Pope came to say, hey, I'm the authority over everything, and to attribute to himself all. But the history all kind of ties together. So this is the real history. This is how people reacted. Like, there's a lot of early Christians who comment on Matthew 16:16 and the fact that, Peter said, Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and they talk about what that means. And they never say that means that the Roman bishop has authority over everybody else because he's descended from Peter. And there's some intricate things involved in that, because by the 3rd century, well, I'm not going to cover all that. You got to read the book if you want to know. There's a lot of details in there. There's a lot of fun things in there. And thank you for those of you that actually tuned in to this live video. And hope you look at the book. So thank you. If you got anything out of this and enjoyed it, then please subscribe.